never thought this would happen to me. One moment, I was just trying to get by, working 2 jobs, making sure my son had what he needed. The next, I was in the middle of a courtroom, facing accusations that felt like they could break me. And then, my son stood up. It all started in a small town where everyone knew everyone. I wasn't rich, never had been, and there were days when I wasn't sure how I'd make ends meet. But I was proud of the life I built. I kept my head down, worked hard, and did the best I could for my son Jamal. He was everything to me, my little ray of light in a world that often felt dark. The trouble began when I lost my job at the diner. It wasn't anyone's fault, just bad timing. The owner shut down because business wasn't good, and I was left scrambling to find another job. After weeks of searching, I finally found an opening as a janitor at a local law firm. The hours were long, and the pay was low, but it was something. It meant I could keep a roof over our heads. One evening I was finishing my shift, cleaning up the back office, when I noticed something strange. A purse was left on one of the desks, tucked into a corner, like someone had forgotten it. It wasn't a cheap purse, the leather was expensive, the kind of thing you might see in a high-end store. I looked around, and no one was there. I wasn't thinking straight. I was tired, frustrated, and honestly, it felt like life had been piling on, one thing after another. In that moment, I just took it. I figured I could sell it and buy some things we needed. I needed to provide for Jamal, and I felt like this was my only shot. But I wasn't careful. The next morning, the police were knocking on my door. Someone had noticed the purse missing, and security cameras had caught me leaving the office with it. The moment they arrested me felt like the ground was ripped out from under me. I couldn't believe it. I'd made a mistake, a huge one, and now I was facing charges that could destroy everything. My son, Jamal, was only 14, but he could see what was happening. He knew how hard I worked, how much I loved him, and how I'd always tried to teach him the difference between right and wrong. The guilt I felt weighed on me every second, but I didn't know how to fix it. The day of the trial came, and I sat in that courtroom feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. The prosecutor painted me as a thief, a woman who took something that didn't belong to her. It felt like everyone in that room had already decided who I was. They didn't see the woman who had worked for years, the mother who did everything for her son. They just saw the woman who had stolen. When it was time for me to speak, I couldn't. I wanted to apologize, to explain, but nothing came out. The fear of being judged was too much. But then, Jamal stood up. At first, I didn't realize what he was doing. He had been sitting next to me, his eyes wide and his hands clenched tightly together. But when he stood, the whole room went silent. His voice cracked as he spoke, but he didn't back down. "My mom," he started, looking at me. "She's not perfect, but she's my mom. And she's never done anything like this before. She's worked hard every day of my life, and I know she messed up. But that doesn't make her a bad person. She's not a criminal. She's a mom trying to do right by her son. If she took that purse, it wasn't because she wanted to steal. It was because she's scared. We're poor, and sometimes people forget about people like us." The room was still. I could feel everyone's eyes on Jamal, but I couldn't look at them. I was too ashamed. Jamal went on, his voice stronger now, but still filled with the raw emotion of a 14-year-old boy who just wanted to protect his mom. "I know it's not right, but I know my mom. She's the one who taught me how to be good, how to do better, how to treat people with respect. She's not perfect, but she's mine. And if they punish her, then they're punishing me too. So, if you're going to judge her, you have to know that you're judging me too." There was a long silence after he finished. People shifted in their seats, looking at each other, unsure of what to say. I don't think anyone expected Jamal to speak like that, to defend me so fiercely. I certainly didn't. But in that moment, I saw a strength in him that I hadn't realized was there. He was brave, and he wasn't going to let anyone tear me down. The judge was the first to speak, clearing his throat. "I'll take this into account," he said quietly. And just like that, it felt like a shift had slowly happened. The tension in the room lifted. Though I knew it wasn't over yet, the trial continued, but something had changed. Jamal's words had made people see me differently, even if just for a moment. In the end, I was given probation instead of jail time. The judge said it was because of my record. Because I wasn't a repeat offender, and because of Jamal's testimony, I left the courtroom that day with my head held a little higher. Though the weight of my actions still sat heavily on my heart, I knew I had to make it right, but I also knew that I wasn't alone. Jamal had stood by me, and that meant more than anything. I'll never forget what he said. It was a reminder that sometimes, even when everything feels like it's falling apart, there's always someone who believes in you, and that's worth more than anything money can buy. Jamal was my rock, and he still is. The months after the trial were hard, but not in the way I thought they would be. The guilt still lingered, of course. I kept replaying that night over and over in my mind, asking myself why I didn't just walk away from that purse. But as time passed, I started to see things a little clearer. Jamal's words echoed in my head more than I'd care to admit. He saw me, not just for my mistakes, but for who I was, the mother who worked herself to the bone for him, and somehow, that gave me a bit of peace. After the trial, people in town started looking at me differently. Some were kind, offering small gestures of support, offering me extra hours at the cleaning job, or giving me food when things were tight. Some, though, made me feel smaller. A lot of the people who had known me for years, who I thought were my friends, started to avoid eye contact or whisper when I passed by. But none of that hurt as much as I thought it would. What hurt the most was how Jamal was treated. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't responsible for what I had done, but the whispers about his mom started to reach him. Kids at school were talking, and he came home one day with tears in his eyes, asking me why people were calling me a thief. I saw how it weighed on him, how he carried the burden of defending me, even though he shouldn't have to. He shouldn't have had to grow up so fast. I don't care what they say, Mom. You're still my mom, he'd tell me when I asked him about it. But I saw the way his shoulders drooped when he walked into school, the way he hesitated when he saw his friends. My son, the one who had stood up for me in that courtroom, was facing something much worse, the shame that came from the judgment of others. I wanted to make it right. I wanted to fix the broken pieces, but I didn't know how. One day after school, Jamal came home with a letter in his hand. It was from the school. He handed it to me, his face tight. I opened it, expecting to see some kind of disciplinary warning or something about his grades. Instead, it was an invitation to a scholarship program. It was for kids who had faced adversity, kids who had to fight just to survive. Jamal's teachers had nominated him for it. I couldn't stop the tears. My boy, who had already been through so much, was being recognized for his resilience. The scholarship was for college, for his future, and it was a sign that people saw him for who he truly was, not for the mistakes I had made, but for the strength he had shown in the face of them. I'll never forget the day I told him about the scholarship. We were sitting on the couch, and I could see the doubt in his eyes, like he didn't believe me at first. When I finally told him that he had been nominated, his face lit up. And for the first time in months, I saw a smile on his face that wasn't forced. "You're proud of me?" he asked, his voice small, like he wasn't sure if it was okay to believe it. "More than you'll ever know," I said, pulling him into a tight hug. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I wasn't the only one who needed saving. Maybe Jamal was the one saving me all along. As we moved forward, things weren't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, still days when I questioned myself and my choices. But Jamal's resilience, his unwavering belief in me, reminded me that I wasn't defined by one mistake. He was my reminder that we could start fresh, that we could keep going. I worked harder than ever, not just for the paycheck, but for Jamal. I started applying for better jobs, trying to give us the life we deserved. It wasn't easy, but with every rejection, I had Jamal there, telling me not to give up. He believed in me, and that belief, that faith, was something I couldn't take for granted. That scholarship wasn't just a ticket to a better future for Jamal. It was a message to both of us. We were more than our circumstances, more than the mistakes we made. We were worthy of love, of respect, and of second chances. Years later, when Jamal walked across the stage to accept his college degree, I looked at him and saw the young man who had always been braver than I had known. His success wasn't just his own, it was ours. He had stood for me when I couldn't stand for myself, and together we had made it through the toughest of times. I don't know where life will take us from here, but I know that no matter what happens, Jamal and I have each other, and that's worth more than any prize, more than anything I could ever ask for. He's my hero, and I'll spend the rest of my life making sure he knows just how proud I am of the person he's become. Because when the world tells you you're nothing, sometimes all you need is one person to remind you that you're everything. And that's what Jamal did for me. As Jamal moved on to college, I found myself with more time to think for so many years. My life had been consumed with the constant grind to make sure we were both okay. I was always focused on the next step, the next paycheck, the next problem to solve. But now, seeing him thrive in a new chapter of his life, I realized that I had neglected a part of myself. I'd lost pieces of who I was in the process of being a mother. And though I loved every minute of it, there were times I wished I could have done more for me. I spent some time reflecting, thinking about what I really wanted for years. I had been working so hard for Jamal's future, but somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that I was worthy of a future too. I began taking small steps to rebuild myself, slowly but surely, not just as a mother, but as the woman I had always been before the struggles of life weighed me down. I enrolled in a community college, taking a couple of evening courses in business administration. It was a long shot, but I felt like I needed something to push me forward. Jamal had shown me what was possible with hard work and belief in something better. So I decided it was time I showed him that same drive. I owed it to both of us. There were nights I was exhausted. I still worked full-time, cleaning offices and handling whatever side gigs I could find. But I made it through. Every time I looked at Jamal, especially when he came home for breaks or when we talked on the phone, I felt a sense of pride that made it all worth it. He came home after his first year of college with a little more confidence in his step. "I've been thinking," he told me one night. "Sitting on the couch, I want to help people like you helped me. People who feel like they don't have a shot. People who get told no too many times. I want to help them see that they have more than one chance." I could barely speak. Here he was, my son, taking everything we had been through, the mistakes, the struggles, the moments of doubt, and turning them into something powerful. "Something good. I'm so proud of you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. It wasn't the first time I had said it, but somehow it felt like the most important, because in that moment, I realized Jamal wasn't just following his dream. He was forging his own path, and every part of me wanted to walk beside him, to be his strength, just like he had been mine. When he graduated with honors, I felt the weight of our journey. It wasn't just his achievement, it was ours. I knew how much he had carried with him, how much he had given of himself to get there, and I knew I had been a part of that. We had both fought through pain, judgment, and fear. We had both faced people who didn't believe in us, but somehow, here we were. Jamal went on to law school with the same scholarship that had started it. He worked hard, and his passion for justice, for fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves, burned bright in him. I could see that in everything he did. His purpose was clear, and I could only marvel at how far he'd come from the scared little boy who had stood up in that courtroom for me. One evening after a long day of studying, Jamal sat down beside me and said, "You know, Mom, I always wondered if you thought I was going to turn out okay. If you ever doubted, I could always tell you were worried about me." I thought about that for a moment. Unsure of how to answer, the truth was I had worried. I had doubted, but as I looked at him, this young man, full of strength and determination, I realized I didn't have to worry anymore. "I never doubted you," I finally said, my voice steady. "I doubted me, but you, I always knew you were going to be something special. You've always been stronger than I ever was." He smiled at me then, that smile that made everything feel okay. It wasn't perfect, but we had made it through together, and in that moment, I knew there was nothing we couldn't face, nothing that could break us. As Jamal continued to grow and accomplish his dreams, I kept pushing forward as well. I earned my associate's degree, then my bachelor's, and eventually, I started my own small business. It wasn't easy, but it felt like the next logical step in my journey, one I hadn't realized I could take until I saw how far Jamal had come. The mistakes, the struggles, the broken parts of us, they didn't define us. We had learned, not just from the good things in life, but from the mistakes, the hard lessons, and the pain. We had learned how to keep going, how to rise up when everything seemed like it was against us. We had learned that we didn't need permission to dream, to fight, or to believe that we were worth more than what the world told us. Jamal went on to become a public defender, fighting for those who couldn't afford a lawyer, fighting for people who had nowhere else to turn. I sat in the front row when he took his oath as an attorney. Tears in my eyes. I had never been prouder of anyone in my life. He had done it. We had done it. And when it was my turn to speak at his wedding years later, as he married the love of his life, I looked out at the crowd filled with family and friends, and knew that everything we had been through had brought us to this moment. My son, who had once stood up for me when I couldn't stand for myself, had now built a life that was his, and I had built mine too. We've been through a lot, I said, my voice shaky. But look at us, we're here. We're stronger, we're not perfect, but we are more than enough. And I couldn't be prouder of the man you've become. Jamal. As I looked at him, standing there with his new wife by his side, I realized that no matter where life took us, no matter what struggles lay ahead, we would always have each other. And that was more than enough to face whatever came next. Years passed, and life kept unfolding in ways I never could have imagined. Jamal's career as a public defender took off. He was good, damn good at what he did. His clients respected him, the ones who had felt forgotten by the system, and his colleagues admired his fierce commitment to justice. He never let the pressures of his job break him down. He was determined to make a difference, to ensure people who had been overlooked or dismissed were given the same chance at fairness he'd fought for his whole life. As for me, my small business grew steadily. I had started with nothing, just a handful of savings and a lot of hope. And now I was finally in a position where I could provide for myself without having to stretch every dollar. It wasn't a lavish life, but it was mine. It felt good to finally have stability, to be able to look around and know that I had built this with my own hands. Jamal was proud of me, just as I was of him. We shared that bond of knowing how far we'd come from those dark days of fear and uncertainty. But even in these moments of success, life still wasn't always easy. There were moments when I would look at Jamal, now a grown man, and remember that little boy who had defended me in court all those years ago. There were moments when the world would remind me that the judgment, the prejudice, and the struggle were never truly gone. The system wasn't fixed. Racism was still very much alive, and it still affected everything: our choices, our future. One afternoon, Jamal came home to visit. We sat in my small kitchen, and after the usual greetings and catching up, he dropped a stack of papers onto the table. I looked at him, concerned. He wasn't one to show stress easily. But today was different. His shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched. "What's going on?" I asked. Jamal sighed, leaning back in his chair, rubbing his hands over his face. "I'm dealing with something at work. There's a case, one of the toughest I've had yet. The system is broken, and I feel like I'm hitting a wall every single day. It's just exhausting, Mom." I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "What's going on with the case?" "You know you can talk to me about it." He paused, then opened up about the case he was working on. It was about a young man, a black teenager who had been wrongfully arrested during a protest. The charges were fabricated, and Jamal believed in his gut that this kid's life had been ruined by a system that had failed him from the start. The deeper Jamal dug, the more he uncovered false testimony, planted evidence, racial profiling. It was everything Jamal had fought against his entire career, all wrapped up in one case. "I know what's at stake for him," Jamal said quietly. "This kid's future is hanging by a thread, and I don't know if I can get him out of this." "Mom, the system doesn't want to change. People don't care about him, and they never will. It's so hard to keep fighting, to keep believing that things can be different." I saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of it. I knew what he was going through because I had been there, in the trenches of fighting for what's right, feeling like it would never end. But I also knew that his fight, the one he had taken on, was important. It was crucial. "And he wasn't in this alone, Jamal," I said, my voice steady but full of conviction. "I know it's hard. Hell, it might always be hard, but I've seen you. I've seen you face down every obstacle, every hurdle, and still come out stronger. You've been fighting for people who have no one else, who are overlooked, underestimated. You can't stop now. You've got this. You're the person who can make a difference. Not because you're perfect, but because you never stop trying." He looked at me, silent for a moment, as if weighing my words. "Hey there. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit subscribe to join me for more powerful real-life stories that spark change and inspire strength. Together we can explore stories of resilience, justice, and the moments that make a difference. Your support helps amplify voices that need to be heard. So let's grow this community of change makers. Click subscribe now and let's continue this journey together. Then with a small, weary smile, he nodded. You always know what to say. I'm your mom, I replied with a grin. It's my job to remind you that you're stronger than you think. And I meant it. Jamal had grown up to be exactly what I knew he would be, a fighter for justice. For truth, it wasn't always going to be easy. The world was full of unfairness, of prejudice and hate. But Jamal was one of the people who could stand up and challenge it. And so was I, as the weeks went on. Jamal fought that case with everything he had. There were setbacks, moments when it felt like the system would swallow the truth whole. But in the end, with the hard work of Jamal and a few allies he'd made along the way, the truth came out, the charges were dropped, and the young man was released. Jamal came home that night, looking exhausted but also relieved. He didn't say much at first, just collapsed onto the couch, and we sat in silence for a few moments. Finally, he looked up at me. I did it, he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and pride. I got him free. You did, I said, my heart swelling. You changed someone's life. You made a difference. I don't know how I did it, but I guess I just kept going, he replied, just like you always taught me. And in that moment, I realized something. Jamal had become everything I had always wanted for him and more. He had faced a world that tried to hold him back, that tried to tell him he was less than, that tried to make him feel small. But Jamal had never accepted that. He had kept pushing forward, kept fighting, just like I had taught him to do. The next morning, we sat together, sipping our coffee in the kitchen. The house was quiet, but in that stillness, I felt something powerful, something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Jamal had made it, we had made it, and no matter what came next, I knew we would keep going, just like always. Because no matter how hard it got, we had each other, and that was enough to face whatever challenge lay ahead. The years that followed were filled with both triumphs and challenges. But through it all, Jamal and I had an unspoken understanding. Our bond had been forged in adversity, in pain, and in the resilience that came from facing down the darkest parts of life and still walking forward. No matter what life threw at us, we had each other. Jamal's career continued to grow. He took on more high-profile cases. Cases that were about more than just the law. They were about making a stand, about righting the wrongs in a world that seemed all too comfortable with injustice. With each case, I could see the passion and fire in him, that same fierce spirit that had kept us both going when everything seemed impossible. And yet, even as Jamal's star rose in the world of law, he never let the success change him. He never forgot where he came from, or the people who had believed in him when no one else did. That was one of the things I admired most about him, his ability to stay grounded, to keep pushing forward while still holding on to the values that had shaped him. But like me, he wasn't immune to the weight of the world. He still carried the burden of seeing how deeply ingrained the systems of oppression were, how much work still needed to be done. There were nights he would come home late, exhausted and frustrated, his shoulders heavy with the burden of all the cases he couldn't win, all the people he couldn't save. And on those nights, I was there. I was there to remind him of the young boy who had stood up for me in court all those years ago. I reminded him that it wasn't about the wins or the losses. It was about doing what was right. It was about making sure the voices of the voiceless were heard. And most importantly, it was about never giving up. There were moments when Jamal would express his doubts. The world could be cruel. And sometimes the injustice was so overwhelming that it felt like no matter how much progress they made, it was never enough. But that's when I would remind him of what he had already accomplished. Not just the cases he'd won, but the lives he had touched, the people he had fought for, and the change he had brought to the world. He had already made an impact far greater than most could ever dream of. But my journey, too, was evolving. As Jamal became more settled in his career, I found myself stepping into a new chapter. I started attending local community events, offering mentorship to young women who, like me, had struggled to find their footing in a world that often overlooked them. I became involved in initiatives that helped people who had been through hardship get back on their feet. Just as I had, I shared my story with anyone who would listen, hoping to inspire someone to keep fighting when they felt like giving up. I remember one day, standing before a group of young women in a community center, sharing my experience. I talked about the mistakes I had made, the trials I had faced, and the lessons I had learned. I told them how my son had stood by me when I couldn't stand for myself. I spoke about how, even when the world seemed determined to break us down, we always had the power to rebuild ourselves. One of the women approached me afterward, her eyes full of gratitude. "You're proof that we can change," she said, her voice shaky but full of hope, that we don't have to stay stuck in the past. That moment hit me in a way I can't fully explain. It wasn't about the people I had helped in the past. It was about what I was doing now. I was still fighting, still pushing forward, still trying to make sure that the future was brighter, not just for Jamal, but for everyone. It wasn't enough to just survive. It was about creating a legacy of strength and resilience that would be passed down to the next generation. Jamal's own family grew over time. He got married, and a few years later, he became a father. I watched him now in a new role, and I could see in him the same tenderness, the same protective love that he had always shown. It wasn't just about being a father. It was about raising a child who would grow up knowing the value of compassion, justice, and standing up for what's right. When his daughter, Ella, was born, I held her in my arms and couldn't help but think of everything we had been through. She was a symbol of hope, a new beginning. I whispered to her softly, "You have a whole family behind you. We'll teach you to be strong. We'll teach you to fight. Just like your father did, just like we did." Jamal looked at me then with a smile that showed he understood exactly what I meant. "I want her to grow up knowing the truth," he said, "that no matter where life takes her, she's capable of anything." I had no doubt that Ella would grow up in a world full of love and support, but I also knew that the fight for equality, for fairness, would continue. The world wasn't perfect, and it might never be, but with people like Jamal, and now Ella, to carry the torch, I knew the fight would never die, through everything. I had learned one thing: life isn't about how many times you fall, it's about how you rise each time. Jamal and I had both stumbled. Both had our fair share of struggles, but we had kept rising. We had become stronger with each challenge, and we had learned to lean on each other, to trust in the bond we shared. As I watched Jamal with his family, my heart swelled with pride. We had come so far, and I knew that no matter what the future held, we would always have each other. The world could be cruel, it could be unforgiving, but with the love we shared, with the strength we carried, there was nothing we couldn't face together. And so life moved forward, not always easy, not always fair, but with the knowledge that we had the power to make a difference. And that was enough to keep us going as the years passed. I found myself standing at a crossroads, reflecting on the life Jamal and I had built together. Watching him now, a successful attorney, a loving husband and father, I realized how much he had truly become everything I had hoped for and more. Yet even with everything we had achieved, I knew the fight was far from over. I had taken on the role of a community advocate more seriously in the past few years, trying to make a lasting difference where it was most needed. I worked alongside local organizations, doing everything from organizing food drives to offering job training programs for people who, like me, had once felt invisible in a world that didn't care. I saw it as my way of paying forward the love and encouragement that had carried me through the toughest times. I wanted people to know they weren't alone, that their stories mattered, that no mistake defined them. One of the things I focused on was helping single mothers. Just like I had once been, there were so many women out there who were struggling, who felt like they were fighting a losing battle. I knew how hard it was to balance work, raising kids, and trying to build a life that felt stable. I shared my story with them, letting them know that it wasn't too late to turn things around, that they had the power to rebuild their lives. Just like I had, one of those women, Tiffany, came into my life at a time when I needed her just as much as she needed me. She was a mother of 2 young kids, living in a rough neighborhood, struggling to make ends meet. She was exhausted, and the weight of her circumstances was crushing her spirit. When she came to one of my community workshops, she was quiet, withdrawn, unsure of what she could offer. But I saw something in her, a spark of potential, even if she couldn't see it yet. It took a few months, but slowly Tiffany began to open up. She came to every workshop, asked questions, started taking small steps to change her circumstances. She applied for jobs she never thought she could get and started saving what little she could. Watching her grow, watching her confidence build, was like watching a flower bloom in slow motion. One day, she called me after she landed her first full-time job, a job she was incredibly proud of. "I don't know how to thank you." "Miss Williams," she said over the phone, her voice shaking, "you believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You showed me that I could do it. I felt my heart swell in my chest. You did it, Tiffany, I replied. I just helped you see what was already inside of you. And that was the truth. I didn't have all the answers. But I had learned through my own experience that sometimes all it takes is someone who believes in you to help you believe in yourself. Tiffany had taken the first step, and I had been there to help guide her along the way, just as Jamal had done for me all those years ago. As Tiffany's confidence grew, so did her desire to help others. She started attending some of my workshops to share her own story, to show other women what was possible when they refused to give up. I couldn't have been prouder of her. She had come a long way, and she was giving back in ways I hadn't expected. It was moments like these that reminded me why I kept fighting. Yes, there was still so much injustice in the world. Yes, the systems we fought against were still broken, still crushing lives, but in these small victories, in the lives we touched and changed, there was hope. Tiffany's story, Jamal's work, the young people we mentored, these were the things that kept me going. We might not change everything in one go, but one life, one step at a time was enough. And when I looked at Jamal with his beautiful daughter, Ella, now 5 years old, I knew that the future, though uncertain, was a little brighter because of the work we were doing. Ella had grown up in a world where her father was respected for his hard work and his integrity. She would never have to face the same kind of prejudice that Jamal and I had, and that in itself was a victory. The next generation would have the tools to build on the progress we had made, to continue pushing for change. But even as I looked forward, I couldn't forget the past. It was those early days, those tough moments when Jamal and I had nothing. When the world felt like it was against us, that had shaped us into who we were. I could still feel the weight of it sometimes, the anger and the hurt that had fueled my drive for change. But now, instead of being consumed by it, I was using it to fuel the next chapter of my life. One evening, as we sat together at my kitchen table, Jamal and I talked about the future. He had just returned from a case he'd been working on, one that had taken a lot out of him emotionally. But even with the exhaustion weighing on him, he still had that fire, that passion for justice that had always burned bright. "Mom, I've been thinking about something," he said, his voice serious. "I want to start a foundation, a place where people, especially young people who face the same kinds of struggles we've gone through, can come and get help, legal aid, job training, mentorship, a place where they can see that it's possible to rise above everything." I felt tears well up in my eyes as I looked at him. This was the culmination of everything we had worked for. This was our legacy, his legacy. The things I had fought for, the lessons I had learned, were being passed down to the next generation, and they were now being used to make the world better. I think that's a great idea. "Jamal," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "I think you've just given me a new goal." And with that, our journey continued. Not as a story of surviving the odds, but as one of passing the torch. I knew the road ahead would still have its challenges, its struggles and its heartaches, but with Jamal, Tiffany, and the people we had helped along the way, I knew we had started something bigger than ourselves, something that would continue long after we were gone. Together we would keep fighting. Together we would build a future where no one had to face the same battles we had. And we would keep teaching those who came after us that no matter how hard it got, no matter how impossible it seemed, they had the power to rise above. We had all learned that one truth: resilience wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. As the years rolled on, Jamal's foundation grew, becoming a beacon for those who, like us, had been forgotten or overlooked by the system. What started as an idea born out of our shared experiences, our struggles, and the lessons we had learned had turned into something truly transformative. The foundation offered free legal assistance, job placement services, mentorship programs, and educational scholarships for young people who were at risk of falling through the cracks. I spent a lot of time volunteering there, helping with the outreach programs, organizing events, and speaking at community gatherings. It wasn't just about helping others anymore. It had become a mission of purpose that went beyond us, beyond our family, and into the lives of people who were trying to carve out a better future for themselves. I had come to realize that everything we had fought for wasn't just about surviving. It was about creating opportunities for others to do the same. Tiffany, who had once been one of my workshop participants, was now one of the foundation's lead coordinators. She had become a mentor to countless other women, helping them navigate the same obstacles she had overcome. It was incredible to watch her grow into a leader, someone who now inspired others the way I had inspired her. The full circle moment was not lost on me. One day, Tiffany and I were sitting in my living room after a long day of meetings. We were talking about the future of the foundation, and she mentioned how she had just signed on another young woman who reminded her so much of herself when she first walked through our door. She smiled as she spoke, the joy in her voice palpable. Every time I see someone like her, I remember where I came from, Tiffany said. It's like I'm seeing the hope in them that I used to have. I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. You've come a long way, Tiffany. You've given so much. And now you're changing lives the way you were changed. That's the thing about giving. It doesn't just help the people you're giving to, it changes you too. When I started this journey, I never imagined that it would come full circle like this. That my experiences, my mistakes, and my pain would become the foundation of something much greater than myself. But that's exactly what had happened. We had turned our suffering into something powerful. Jamal was still as passionate about his work as ever. He had become a mentor to so many young lawyers in the field, pushing them to think beyond the law and to focus on justice. I watched him, and I realized that in so many ways, he had grown into a man I could not only be proud of, but also learn from. He never stopped pushing for change, never stopped fighting for the voiceless. Every case, no matter how small, mattered to him. His belief in the importance of the work kept him grounded. Even when things felt overwhelming, it wasn't always easy, though. The weight of the injustice he fought against sometimes wore him down. There were days when he'd come home late, his face tired, his shoulders heavy, but even then, he would sit with Ella, his daughter, and read to her, his voice soft, the love he had for her radiating through every word. She would look up at him with those big, trusting eyes, and I knew that no matter how tough the world was, Jamal was teaching her. By example, how to be brave, how to be kind, and how to fight for what's right. I started to notice something in Ella as she grew older. It was a quiet confidence, the kind that you can't fake. She carried herself like she knew the world was her oyster, but she also understood the responsibility that came with that knowledge. I saw so much of Jamal in her, the same determination, the same drive to do good in the world, and as her mother and grandmother, we made sure that she knew the story of how Jamal and I fought against everything stacked against us. We wanted her to know that she too had the strength to overcome whatever obstacles life might throw her way. One evening, Jamal and I were sitting together on the porch, watching the sunset. We had been through so much struggles, victories, losses, but somehow, we had come through it all with a strength that felt unshakable. You know, Jamal said quietly, sometimes I still wonder if we're really making a difference. It's hard sometimes to see the impact we're having when there's so much more to be done. I looked at him, his face bathed in the orange glow of the sunset, and smiled softly. I know the feeling, but the truth is, we can't change everything all at once. We're not going to fix the whole world, but what we can do is keep pushing. Keep helping where we can, one person at a time, and if we can make a difference in one life, then it's all worth it. He nodded, a slow smile creeping onto his face. You're right, we've come a long way. And we've built something here, something real. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. There were still battles to fight, obstacles to overcome, and people who would try to bring us down. But now I understood something deep. The fight wasn't just about achieving a victory or winning a case. It was about standing firm day after day, even when it felt like everything was against us. It was about showing up for yourself and for others, no matter how difficult it got. As I looked over at Jamal, I saw all the moments we had shared, all the pain and the victories we had experienced. I could see the way his work, his passion, and his love for his family had shaped the world around him.